I am really excited to welcome Jacqueline Suskin. She's a poet and an educator. She lives in Michigan, but she's lived all over the country, translating people's feelings and thoughts and deep emotions into words for them. Thank you so much for being here today with me and for talking a little bit about your practice. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start out with, I know that we talked a little bit about this, but could you talk about sort of the trajectory of how you became a poet? Because you have sort of there's nobody like you. I mean, there's nobody like anybody, but in the sense that, can you talk a little bit about the poetry store?
Yeah. Well, I've always been a poet. Even when I was a kid, I loved poetry. I loved writing poetry. I filled up notebooks with poems before I even really knew what a poem was. So that's like the beginning of it, was little Jacqueline as a poet. But then I realized that I would get a degree in poetry. I got a scholarship to go to Florida State University, and they had at the time, I don't know if this is true anymore, but they had one of the top 10 writing programs in the country, poetry programs. And I didn't even know that. I just chose that school because I went and visited, and they read an Elizabeth Bishop poem to me that blew my mind. And I was like, I'm going here. And over the years, and after getting my degree, I was like, I'm not going to go follow the traditional path of poetry, which is very academic, and institutional education is a huge part of that. Like, usually you go get your master's, you get your PhD, you teach as a professor, then you're in this club and you have access to these publications of, institutional level. And I was like, I'm going to do it different. I'm going to go out into the world and basically gather things to write about. I wanted to have some experience. I didn't just want to go to school. I wanted to live my life. And so I was on the road traveling, and I bought a typewriter. And then I was in Oakland, California. This is back in 2009. And I met this person who was writing poems on the street with a typewriter for a living. And he was like, this is how I make my money. I was like, what? That's amazing. I love that. And we just struck up a friendship, and he was like, you should try it. You got a typewriter. You should do it with me. And I did. And that totally changed my life, because it opened this door that was definitely like a connection between the two parts of me that I kind of valued the most, or my talents, which one is to write and the other is to connect deeply with people. And I got to do that in this really special, unique way. And so then that was my only job, typing poems on the spot on a typewriter for people in public places. They could pay whatever they want to for the poems. And that was my only job for 11 years. So that's how it all started.
I mean, it's pretty incredible that you were able to exist. And because you lived mostly in California while you were doing this, or did you tour and do this at the same time?
I lived mostly in California, but I used a smaller typewriter after that, and then I could travel with it with ease, which was cool because I got to go and do jobs all around the country. And I even got to go to Portugal and type poems at a wedding and do lots of wild stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. So it's 40,000 like a estimate of how many poems that
I got that number from the average of poems that I would write at the farmers markets. And then I would sometimes do a count for what I would take to write at private events. And then I just did like an average of all of that. And it's probably way more than that, honestly, but that felt like a reasonable number.
What do people ask? I'm really curious about, I'm sure that, I don't know if I'm sure about this, but that there are common themes that people want you to write about, or common like human experiences that like people struggle with expressing. Can you speak to what sort of data you've gleaned from?
So much data. I always say that I feel like I've had this really, really unique glimpse of the human condition, because anyone could get a poem, because you can pay whatever you want to for it. So that offers it to every demographic. Like, everyone could afford a poem. It doesn't matter if you only have $1 or a penny or whatever. So I got to see like across the board, and I was in these public places where all different types of people could access me, just what everyone was thinking and feeling. And everybody, no matter where I was in the world, no matter what I was, what kind of place I was typing at, everyone asks for the same stuff. Everyone's going through the same joy, the same sorrow. Everyone's striving after the same things. And the number one, this is kind of obvious, but the number one request is love. And when anyone would say, I want a poem about love, I would always say, well, what kind of love? And then they would end up expressing something, usually like a story about someone or a heartbreak or something very particular to what they were going through, because love is like the most abstract concept ever. So I would be like, just give me a little door open to your particular love that you're thinking of, and then that would like allow the poem to come through. So love, family, pets. If I never have to write another pet poem, I'll be very happy. But lots of pets. Yeah.
How, when you're in that moment, how do you generate, has there ever been a time where nothing came?
No, I've always been able to move through all of those moments. And a lot of times people ask, like, did you ever get blocked? Like, did you ever just stop and couldn't write anything? And no, that didn't happen, luckily. And I think that, I also didn't repeat myself, which was fun. Like sometimes certain words would get repeated, because I would explain it like this: like if I were in the mindset of thinking about love in a way that this word kept coming through, I'm like, well, if I were only publishing one poem about this type of love, that word would 100% be in it. So now I want to make sure everyone has that word. So sometimes that would happen, but otherwise it was just a new experience with each pet poem. No.
Something I wanted to talk to you about that we didn't talk about in the live was sort of in your book, Everyday a Poem, which I feel like I'm confused. Which one came out first, Everyday a Poem or Help in the Dark Season?
Help in the Dark Season came out first. And then, Every Day is a Poem came out in 2020.
I think I got them mixed up in my head. So sorry if I alluded to one being before the other. But can you talk a little bit about the two projects and how they differ, and how that sort of feeds into kind of the segments of your practice?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It dovetails perfectly off of the theme of love, because I was having dinner with one of my friends who's also a publisher. And he was like, well, one day you should write a book for our publishing company. And I was like, of course, like they're poetry publishers. Sure, that'd be great. And he was like, yeah, you should really write something about love, like your own experience, like your personal experience of love, like your relationships. And I was like, yeah, I haven't really done that, because the books that I had just written, there are some personal things in there about relationships, but it's a trilogy about California. So a lot of it is about my relationship with the earth. So I was like, oh, you mean human love? And I was like, okay, if I'm going to write about human love, I was thinking about it, and I was just like, how would that look? And then the next day he had sent me a contract in my inbox, and I was like, oh, you want this book now? I was like, okay. And so funny enough, things always work like that. I feel like where like a coincidence aligns, and I really needed to do that work. And so Help in the Dark Season allowed me to explore like all of my childhood trauma, and that let me write about love. Like I was like, there's no way I could write about my personal experience of love without writing about my personal experience of trauma. And they're very like deeply connected. So that book of poems is for sure my most personal exploration. They're like very narrative, I love that book. I feel like it opened up the next level of my writing. And then Every Day is a Poem came out the year after that, 1 year after that, or yeah, I think so. And that book is more of like, how do you practice the mindset of a poet, like mindfulness through the poetic lens, like a poetic mindset that can be taught. So a lot of it is about the craft of poetry and being like giving yourself permission to be a poet. The whole like final chapter of the book is like, you have permission to be a poet. And this is a practice and a craft that should be accessible to everyone. It doesn't mean you'll be like a published writer and that will be your job, but it means if you like do this and engage in this, you'll find like clarity and relief by writing and by seeing the world as a poet sees the world. So really that book was so honestly easy for me to write, because it's just the way that my brain already works. And I was like, I just want to give this to other people so that they can have access to this practice.
Can you talk just in tandem with that? Can you talk a little bit about, there was a practice you had, and I feel like a theme for me recently has really been trying to locate awe. And I think that you have kind of a unique perspective on that. Could you talk a little bit about how you
talk about awe? I feel like I'm in a constant state of awe, and that state is like a thing that I feel I noticed people disconnected from in a lot of ways, and that when I would write a poem for them, it would like enliven their sense of awe. And I love the definition of awe is connected to like a grand sense of like fear and wonderment. So fear is involved, in my opinion, because it's like witnessing the massive, you know, nature of the universe and trying to comprehend like what it's offering, and recognizing that it's all impermanent and will die and it will all like end, and there's fear in that, but that it's also like incredible that we get to do it at all. And so like my practice, and I talk about this the whole beginning of the book, Every Day is a Poem, is about cultivating this sense of awe that you can tap into, so that you're just living in a state of amazement, and that, you know, maybe not every second, but that you can access it really easily. Like most things that you practice so that you can tap into it in a quicker way, or that it's accessible to you. It's like a tool in your toolkit. And I think of awe like that. Like I remember when I found that word, I was like, this is the word for how I feel all the time. Like this sense of, you know, just being kind of like knocked back by the beauty of everything, the complexity of everything, the horror of everything. Like one of the things I talk about is that awe can be like really connected to darkness. Like you can just be in awe of the state of the world, and wonder, and that transfixed feeling doesn't have to be assigned to only the good.
Were you, when you were brought up, were you raised with the idea that like we hold one emotion at the same time?
Hmm. I don't know. I feel like, yeah,
Sorry if that question was out of the blue.
no, that's a cool question. I'm like, the only thing I can think of that like immediately comes to my mind is like, yeah, being like praised for just being like energized and present and like, you know, calm. But if I were upset or angry or crying, then those things were not praised. And like that, I really remember that as a kid being like, oh, I see that like only this really one state of being is received well.
Yeah. No, I think as having, when I have a small child who's learning about emotions, and when I teach her like all of the, to be able to like identify, you have to put these sort of like boundaries on emotions to teach them, or at least my understanding of how I'm teaching them. But it's not really the way that emotions work.
Yeah.
Like you were saying with awe, like there's both holding the horror and the joy simultaneously encapsulates the sort of complexity of the word and the sort of feeling embodied in it.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect like way to kind of package what language does, is like if you have the right word for something and you can assign that word, then it does the work of holding so much for you. And then it's kind of like the poet's job to then take that word and illuminate that big abstract like cape that exists behind it. You know, like all of the connotations are there, but how is this person going to show you what part of that word means what to them? And I think like that's how I explore the word awe also, is that it has all these multifaceted offerings, and that you can kind of choose to like connect with whatever part makes sense for you, and then you can bring all of that into your writing or into your mindset. Yeah.
I think so. Both of these books I feel like are really inspiring in tandem. I think having, for me, reading poetry but also writing is an interesting way to like explore it. I was wondering, so you talk a lot about how everybody, you're a human and we're all humans and everybody can write, or if I can do it, anyone can do it. I think like all of my life, I think I was told that I like didn't get poetry. And so it's, or at least in sort of formative years, that like it was too complex, or that I was supposed to understand this very one specific thing that a poet was trying to say, when I think that you do an amazing job of sort of breaking down that sort of wall, or that idea that like I'm not good enough to understand what you're trying to say, with the answer of like whatever you receive from the poem is what you receive.
Yeah, I would say that that's like probably my number one goal with my work as a poetry educator, is that I'm trying to like give people access to like explore this huge part of themselves through this practice that's often been, like you said, walled off, or like just considered in this really esoteric, inaccessible way. And I even remember it being taught like that in school, where like poetry is this thing that you have to try really hard to understand and you can get it wrong. But the truth is like, that's not what it's for. It's for you to experience whatever you experience while you're reading it. And I really learned that through my mom, because my mom would be like, oh, I don't understand your poems, like, or I just don't understand writing that's like this. And I would just ask her after she read a poem, I'd be like, okay, so did you see anything when you were reading the poem? Did you have any memories? Did you like think of any colors, or did any of your senses become alive? Like, did you see any visions in your mind? Like, what parts stuck out to you? And she would always be like, oh yeah, this part made me remember this, and like this part made me feel this, and I really like saw the color blue here, and like was reminded of this place I haven't been in a long time. And I was like, that's it, that's the poem. Whatever it is, it's for you. Like, once you as a writer give your work to everyone, like it's for them. So whatever they process from it is what it's meant to do. It's meant for you to do whatever it is that you'll do with it. And then like the other side of it is just, I don't think that everyone can write and that everyone can be like engaged in the written word in that way that like allows them to feel really free in it, in this like finished project and process kind of sense. But I do think that anyone who has like the access to think about things in this like detailed, like appreciative kind of explorative way will then like find out more about themselves. So they'll connect to some bigger picture, or like they'll unleash some feeling in themselves that was kind of hidden or tucked away. And I just think it's like very therapeutic, the practice of even like engaging with what poetry does.
500%. Or I mean, as a person who I feel like I can write in ways that I could never speak, or tell people things that I could never say. And so it's hugely therapeutic for me. Something I'm always sort of fascinated with, since you brought up your mother, is so how we're like these like extensions of our parents. And I was just wondering what your parents did and how that shaped, or your parents' views on poetry, and maybe how that shaped how you chose to always identify, say, as a poet.
Yeah, I would say that my dad has a lot of the cred for that, because he was very supportive. I mean, both my parents were very supportive of me reading and being interested in the arts. And but that was really only up until I was like 8, and then my parents got divorced, and that was strong enough that I held it as like my container for like, I always knew that that was what my dad viewed as like something that was valuable, and my mom just would never question. Like, if I wanted to just be in my room and write and read, and like that was something that I was like fully allowed to do, and it was celebrated. So I was like, oh, this is great, like I can express so much. And I would write about my parents, like I would like get all this stuff out, but it was like a safe place where like no one ever read that, no one ever saw that. And I always say, like, first of all, like their support was really like, I think, crucial in the fact that they like didn't deny that, but then also like that it was private was really important. Like, it was my special, I wasn't like performing my poems to my family when I was younger. That was all like my interior world of figuring things out until I got to middle school. And then I was like, I'm a poet. Like, I wanted everyone to like, and people like that because no one else was a poet. People were like, oh, cool. Like, what thing did you write today?
Yeah, I think like it's weird to think about, or I mean, it's fascinating to me to think about like how maybe if I had grown up in a family of dentists, I would be a dentist. Or if
Yeah, right. Well,
was
neither of
really
my parents
celebrated.
are artists, though. That's an interesting thing. Neither of my parents are really artists. My dad is very theatrical and like did a lot of theater, and I think that aspect of it allows me to be like this. Like, a lot of writers are, that private part is the only part that exists, and they're not performers. But like, I'm 100% a performer. Like, I could get on a stage and talk passionately about this for 3 hours and be like, yeah, that's great, I love that. But most writers are very private and hermit like, and I have that capacity also to be like, peace, I'm going to dip out for a while and no one's going to talk to me, so I can explore whatever it is that I'm exploring.
Do you have like so topic of this, since we're like way over time, but I just feel like there's so many questions I have for you, because I also want to talk to you about performing gender. Well, actually, let's go there and then we'll talk about your secret. But I'll try to not ask any more questions. But you made this post the other day about gender and performance, and it really resonated with me. And I think that when we were talking before this, how you talked about how it resonated, I think, with a lot of people. And I was wondering if you could kind of unpack why maybe we needed to hear that in this moment, and maybe could you describe the post and what you were trying to do and what inclined you to kind of put yourself out there?
Yeah, I think what did I write? I wrote something like, gender is a spectrum, sexuality is fluid, like, and that identity is multifaceted. And I have so many aspects of my identity that come out in like different gendered ways that totally like mix and match. And I have kind of always been like that, even when I was a kid. And I feel like for me, when I decided to write that just the other day, I was like, I just think we consistently need to be reminded of that, because I see a lot of like the social media lens and having an identity can get like very crushed. And like, if you don't do it this exact way or like show up in a consistent way, then your brand is off. But I'm like, but I'm a person. And like, I'm like this, like, I love to go, I got my hair done the other day, like got a nice haircut. And I also like a lot of times will just like totally look like a bumming dude, like smoking a joint, like I've got a lot of different vibes. And I think I just like to like present that and perform that openly so that other people know that they can do that, and you can be all these different parts of yourself. And like, I think the best part of what I was trying to get across and what a lot of people responded to was like, why would we not let ourselves be expansive in our expression of what we are? And a really good friend of mine, Sarah, she wrote something in the comments that was like, yeah, to be expansive, live expansively like the universe. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like we push and shove ourselves into these different identity suits because we feel like we have to. I think we feel like we have to. It's a lot of it is like connected to capitalism and how could you make enough money? How could you do it? Well, you got to have a brand that looks like this and it's got to be and everything has to fit right. But that's not how we are. Like some days I'm like, yeah, I just bought a pair of Betsy Johnson heels and I'm going to wear those to a wedding in Miami in like a very tight dress. And then one day I'm like, oh, I'm going to wear like my Carhartt overalls for a week. And that's like, be stinky and not care and like, whatever, just the obviously it's performed in other ways that are not just clothing and attire, but like, that's like a good way to talk about it sometimes for me is like, just letting all the parts of myself be expressed.
What a privilege it is to be able to watch that, and to also, and in watching you do it, grant myself permission.
Yeah, well, it's also a privilege to be able to do it. So that's like a big part of it. Is I'm very privileged to be in the position to be that person who expresses myself freely like that. And
really fucking cool, I think. Sorry. No, I mean, like, I think that for me, I don't, I perform in lots of ways, but I also am able to, I don't know if I want to use the term indulge, but because I feel like there's sort of a negative connotation in indulgence, especially like self-indulgence. People don't like, but I feel like self-indulgence is really closely linked to like self-exploration and self-care and self-understanding. And so for me, it's like almost, it's a really neutral thing. But I sort of I feel bad about it when I make those sort of consolations for different aspects of my personality. But keeping on track, thank you for talking about that post. I'll link it in the email here for anyone who's interested, or if you have any ideas on how like you play with gender, feel free to comment. But do you have a secret for us, Jacqueline?
Okay, I love this. I don't have a secret, but I'll talk about secrets for a second. I feel like I have never in my life related to the concept of having a secret because kind of what we were just talking about. Like, even when I was little, I've just always been like this really like, here's my truth. Like, I'm this freak today and I'm doing this thing and like, I'll tell you anything. Like, and being on the street and like connecting with people, it's like I learned how to like kind of have boundaries. And so when I think of secrets, I think of like, oh, it's connected to like boundaries and being like, oh, I've learned in my life that like I actually don't have to tell everyone everything all the time to like connect. I can have boundaries and like keep things to myself. And that's been like a really important exploration for me to like recognize that like that's actually like really healthy and beneficial, so that like having like a secret is really probably just me being like, okay, well, I'm not going to go and tell this random person anything about myself. I don't know them. So I'm just going to let that pass. And like, you know, seeing where the different energetic marks are and paying attention to that. But yeah, I feel like I secretly, you know, have these desires to like talk a lot on stage. And that like, that's what I was thinking of. Like, what could I say as a secret? I'm like, it's not really a secret. I think everybody knows that. But I do think about that often, where I'm just like, I meant to like be a orator, like to give, you know, give myself in that way. So I'm
Well, I
like
think that there's
doing
something, I think that there's something that I feel like most people maybe could relate to in that sentiment of being a poet, or like there's something that like you feel really called to do something, but you wouldn't ever like pronounce like it. It's difficult to pronounce. Like for me, at least, I'm projecting being an artist. Like,
yeah.
uh,
I don't know how to like go about, oh, okay, this is a good way to put it. Like, I have been in charge of my own career for 13 years as a poet, but like in that I've had to do a lot of like pretending like I know what I'm doing, like fake it till you make it kind of situational stuff. And that like that, okay, that feels like a realm of like, you know, the secret, where you're like, I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I know I can do it. Like that's a cool like secret exploration. I like
I
that.
don't know what I'm doing, but I know I can do it. I have to remember that. I don't know
Yeah,
what
I
I'm
like
doing, but I think I can do it. Well, thank you so much, Jacqueline, for coming on. And I'll put the links to your website. There's one more workshop, the editing muse workshop. It's on the Saturday, right? But otherwise, Help in the Dark Season and Every Day a Poem are out. You can get it on your website. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
And I also really want to say I commend you for using, I know we talked a little bit about this on Instagram, but using terms, spiritual terms with regards to your artistic practice and your practice as a poet, and embracing those. Because I feel like it is a sacred thing, and we should treat it that way. Thank you so much for doing what you do. It's a privilege to know you. Take care.
Bye.